If someone had told me that after 34 years of marriage, my husband would leave me for a woman half my age, I would have laughed. Not because our marriage was perfect. It wasn't. Like every couple, we had arguments, difficult days, and moments when life tested our patience. But through everything, I believed we were a team. I believed that no matter what happened, we would grow old together. I never imagined that the man who once promised to love me forever would become the person who would break my heart the most. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 62 years old, and until last spring, I believed loyalty was forever. Richard and I had built our lives from nothing. When we first married, we didn't have much money. We lived in a tiny apartment with secondhand furniture and dreams that felt much bigger than our bank account. Those were hard years, but they were happy years. We laughed over burnt dinners, celebrated every small success, and promised each other that one day all our sacrifices would be worth it. When Richard decided to start his own construction company, I stood beside him without hesitation. I worked 2 jobs while he searched for clients. I answered phone calls in the evenings because we couldn't afford a receptionist. I balanced bills, managed paperwork, and believed every sleepless night was an investment in our future. People later admired Richard's success and called him a self-made man. I never corrected them because I didn't need applause. Seeing our family happy was enough for me. We had one daughter, Emily. She became the center of our world. Richard adored her when she was little. Every Saturday he took her to the park while I prepared lunch. Every birthday he made sure she felt like the luckiest little girl alive. Watching them together made me believe we had created the perfect family. Even when life became stressful, I held on to those memories because they reminded me why we had worked so hard. As the years passed, our lives became more comfortable. The business grew, we bought a beautiful family home, and eventually Emily married a wonderful man. Soon after, our granddaughter Lily was born. I thought life had finally reached the peaceful chapter we had both dreamed about. But somewhere along the way, something inside Richard changed. At first, it was so small I barely noticed. He stayed later at work. He spent more time on his phone. Dinner conversations became shorter. Whenever I asked if something was wrong, he smiled and blamed stress. I wanted to believe him because trusting someone you've loved for more than 30 years comes naturally. You don't expect betrayal from the person who knows every part of your life. Every morning I still woke before sunrise to make coffee exactly the way he liked it. Strong, no sugar, just a little cream. Funny, isn't it? You can remember every little detail about someone for decades, while they slowly stop noticing yours. One Tuesday afternoon, I decided to surprise Richard with lunch at his office. It had been months since we'd spent any time together during the day, and I thought maybe a small surprise would remind us of the couple we used to be. When I arrived, his assistant looked uncomfortable. "I didn't know you were coming," she said nervously. "I thought I'd surprise him," I replied with a smile. She hesitated before quietly telling me Richard wasn't there. According to her, he was in a meeting. Something didn't feel right, but I thanked her and walked back outside. As I crossed the street toward my car, I noticed Richard's SUV parked outside an elegant restaurant just around the corner. Curiosity pulled me closer. I looked through the large glass window. Then everything around me stopped. Richard was sitting at a table with a younger woman. She was beautiful, confident, and dressed elegantly. They weren't discussing business. They were laughing. She reached across the table, gently held his hand, and a moment later leaned forward and kissed him. Couldn't breathe. The lunch bag slipped from my hands, but neither of them noticed. I stood frozen, desperately hoping I had misunderstood what I was seeing. Then Richard smiled. It wasn't the polite smile he gave neighbors or customers. It was the smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. My entire world collapsed in silence. I turned away before they could see me and somehow made it back to my car. I sat behind the steering wheel with trembling hands, unable to start the engine. Questions raced through my mind. Who was she? How long had this been happening? How many times had he looked me in the eyes and lied without feeling guilty? For the first time in 34 years, I realized that the man I loved had been living a life I knew nothing about. When I finally found the strength to drive home, I did it in complete silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't answer my phone. I just stared at the road while one question kept repeating inside my mind. How long had my husband been living a completely different life? By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had already cried so much that there were no tears left, only silence. That evening Richard came home carrying his briefcase as though nothing had happened. "How was your day?" he asked. I looked at him for a long moment. The same man I had shared a bed with for 34 years. The same man who had promised to grow old beside me. The same man I had just watched holding another woman's hand. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to scream. Instead, I simply asked, "Were you at the office all afternoon?" Without even thinking, he answered yes. One word, one lie. That single lie hurt more than the kiss I had witnessed earlier. It told me he wasn't just making a mistake. He had become comfortable lying to me. That night I barely slept. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard Richard quietly leave our bedroom. Curious, I stepped into the hallway without making a sound. His voice came from the kitchen. "I miss you too," he whispered. A short pause followed. "No, she doesn't know anything." Another pause. "It won't be much longer." My heart shattered all over again. I quietly returned to bed and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. For the first time in my life, I realized my marriage wasn't falling apart. It had already ended. I was simply the last person to know. The next morning, Richard acted completely normal. He kissed my forehead before leaving for work and told me he'd probably be home late. As soon as his car disappeared, I picked up my phone and called my daughter. Emily answered immediately. "Morning, Mom." The moment I heard her voice, I almost broke down. "Mom, what's wrong?" I tried to speak, but nothing came out. She waited patiently. Finally, I whispered, "I think your father is having an affair." Silence. Complete silence. Then Emily quietly asked, "Are you sure?" "I saw him yesterday." I told her everything. The restaurant, the woman, the lie, the late-night phone call. When I finished, Emily started crying. "I can't believe he'd do this." "Neither can I. I'm coming over." Within 45 minutes, she was sitting beside me in the kitchen, holding my hand exactly the way I used to hold hers whenever she was scared. "You don't deserve this," she said. I smiled sadly. "I keep wondering what I did wrong." Emily looked directly into my eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong. People don't cheat because someone else isn't enough. They cheat because they stop appreciating what they already have." Those words stayed with me. For the first time in days, I stopped blaming myself. That afternoon, instead of sitting at home crying, I decided I wanted answers. I drove back to Richard's office and waited across the street. About an hour later, he walked outside. A few seconds later, the same woman joined him. This time I watched more carefully. She laughed. He opened the car door for her. The little gestures he hadn't done for me in years, he now did effortlessly for someone else. I followed them from a distance. They eventually stopped outside a luxury apartment building overlooking the river. Richard wrapped his arm around her waist as they walked inside together. That image stayed with me all the way home. Later that evening, after Richard fell asleep, I quietly opened our shared laptop. For years we had trusted each other with every password. He never imagined I'd have a reason to look. First, everything seemed ordinary. Then I noticed several bank transfers I didn't recognize. Large withdrawals. Designer stores, luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, jewelry boutiques. My hands began to shake. None of those purchases had been for me. Then I found monthly payments for an apartment lease. The address matched the building I had followed them to earlier that day. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. It wasn't just an affair. He had been building another life, paying for another home, planning another future, while I was still making his morning coffee and believing we were simply going through a difficult season. The following Saturday, Richard finally asked if we could talk. His expression was serious, almost rehearsed. He sat across from me in the living room and took a deep breath. "Evelyn, I've been thinking for a long time. I don't think we're happy anymore." I remained silent. He continued, "I think we've grown apart. I've changed. And I want a divorce." I looked at him calmly. Then I quietly replied, "I know." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I know about her." His face turned pale. For the first time since this nightmare began, Richard realized I already knew everything. He stared at me in complete silence. I don't know what you're talking about." I almost smiled. After everything I had seen, he still chose another lie. "Her name is Vanessa, isn't it?" His shoulders dropped. He looked down at the floor and slowly nodded. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at him calmly. "Because I wanted to see whether you'd tell me the truth on your own." He buried his face in his hands. "I'm sorry." "No." I interrupted gently. "You're sorry I found out." Another long silence filled the room. Finally, he admitted it. "Her name is Vanessa. We've been together for almost a year." Almost a year. 12 months. Hundreds of lies. Hundreds of mornings where he kissed me goodbye before driving to someone else. I never planned for this to happen. They never do. I didn't mean to hurt you, but you did. He looked exhausted. "I love her." Those 3 words landed like a heavy weight on my chest. Not because he loved another woman, because I realized he had stopped choosing me long before he ever admitted it. "I've already spoken to a solicitor," he said quietly. "I'd like this divorce to stay respectful." "So would I." He looked relieved. "I think we should sell the house." I slowly looked around the living room. Every photograph on the wall held a memory. Emily's first birthday, Christmas mornings, family dinners, the chair where Richard used to read every evening. This wasn't just a house. It was my entire adult life. "I won't be selling it." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said." He leaned forward. "Evelyn, legally we'll divide everything." "Not everything." I stood up and walked toward the hallway cupboard. Inside was a blue folder I hadn't opened in years. When I returned, I placed it on the coffee table. "Open it." Richard looked confused. "What is this?" "The house documents." He opened the folder, page after page. Then suddenly, he stopped. His face turned white. "No," he whispered. "This can't be right." I slid the title deed toward him. There was only one name on it. Mine. Evelyn Carter. He looked at me in disbelief. "I thought we transferred it back into both our names." "We never did." "You remember when your company almost failed 15 years ago?" He nodded slowly. "The solicitor recommended putting the house in my name to protect it. You said we'd change it back later. You never did." He sat there speechless. "So, the house belongs to you?" "Yes." He leaned back against the sofa as though the room had started spinning. "I had no idea." "I know. You never checked." For the first time since asking for a divorce, Richard looked frightened. Not because he was losing me, because he realized he wasn't walking away with the future he had imagined. He stood up and walked outside without saying another word. Through the window, I watched him pacing around the garden while talking on his phone. I didn't need to guess who he was calling. About 20 minutes later, he came back inside. His expression was completely different. "Vanessa wants to meet you." I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "She thinks everyone should talk calmly." I couldn't help smiling. "No, but I've spent 34 years protecting this family. I won't spend another minute explaining myself to the woman who helped destroy it. He lowered his head. I understand. A week later, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. When I answered, a woman's voice spoke softly. Evelyn, it's Vanessa. I almost ended the call, but something made me listen. I know you don't want to hear from me. You're right. But please, just 10 minutes. I think you deserve to know the truth. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The next afternoon we met in a quiet cafe on the other side of town. Vanessa arrived wearing an elegant cream coat and carrying a designer handbag. She looked exactly like the woman I'd seen through that restaurant window. Confident, perfect, untouchable. She sat down across from me. For a few moments neither of us spoke. Then she quietly said, I know you hate me. I looked directly into her eyes. I don't hate you. You don't? No. Hate takes too much energy. I simply don't trust you. For the first time, her confident smile disappeared. She looked down at her coffee. Then she said something I never expected. I don't think Richard told you everything. I stayed silent. She continued. When we met, he told me your marriage had already been over for years. He said you stayed together only because it was convenient. I felt my stomach tighten. He said you didn't love each other anymore. She looked genuinely uncomfortable. I believed him. I slowly shook my head. He lied to both of us. She nodded. I know that now. Then she took a deep breath and quietly added, but there's something else you should know. She looked down at her coffee for several seconds before speaking again. When Richard and I first met, I believed every word he told me. He said your marriage had been over for years. He said you were more like roommates than husband and wife. He made me believe he had stayed only because he felt guilty. I listened quietly. Every sentence sounded like another lie Richard had built to justify his choices. Vanessa sighed. I found out the truth too late. What changed? I asked. She looked out of the cafe window. One evening I went to his office to surprise him. I found an old family photo on his desk. It was you, Richard, and your daughter. He looked happier in that picture than I'd ever seen him. I asked him when it was taken. He told me it was years ago, but the way he smiled while looking at it, I realized he wasn't over his old life. I remained silent. She continued. Then I started noticing something else. What? He lied. About little things. He'd tell me he was working late when he wasn't. He'd promise we'd travel together, then cancel. He kept saying we'd buy a bigger house. There was always another excuse. She gave a bitter laugh. One day I realized, if a man can lie to the woman he spent 34 years with, he can lie to anyone. Those words stayed with me. For the first time, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She looked at me with tired eyes. I left because I finally understood something. You didn't lose Richard to me. We both lost him to the person he'd become. I nodded slowly. I think you're right. She stood up. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. No, you don't. She accepted my answer without argument. Before leaving, she quietly said, I hope one day you find happiness again. I smiled gently. I already have. She looked surprised. Then she nodded and walked away. As I watched her disappear down the street, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. Not because the pain had disappeared, because I had finally stopped carrying it. A week later, Richard called again. This time, his voice sounded completely different. Evelyn, could we meet? I hesitated for a moment, then quietly answered, one last time. We met in the small park where we had once taken Emily when she was a little girl. Nothing had changed. The old benches were still there. Children were still laughing near the swings. Life had continued, even while mine had fallen apart. Richard arrived carrying a small envelope. He looked older, not by years, by regret. He sat beside me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he handed me the envelope. Inside was our wedding photograph. The original one. I found it while packing. I thought you should have it. I looked at the smiling couple in the picture. Two young people who truly believed forever existed. I've replayed every decision in my mind, Richard said quietly. I kept asking myself where everything went wrong. I looked at him calmly. It didn't happen in one day. It happened every time you chose a lie instead of the truth. He nodded. I know. I've lost everything. My marriage, my home, my family, my reputation. And in the end, I lost the person I left you for. His voice cracked. I don't expect you to take me back. I know I don't deserve that. I just needed you to hear me say, I'm sorry. I believed him. For the first time, his apology felt real. Not because he wanted something, because he finally understood what his choices had cost. I reached across the bench and gently placed my hand over his. I forgive you. He looked up, tears filling his eyes. You do? Yes. But forgiveness isn't the same as going back. His shoulders slowly dropped. I understand. I've spent the last year rebuilding my life. I found peace. And I won't lose that peace trying to rebuild something that was broken by choice. A tear rolled down his face. You've always been stronger than me. I smiled softly. No, I just learned that my happiness doesn't depend on someone else's decisions. He stood up. So, this is goodbye? I looked around the park one final time, then back at the man I had once planned to spend the rest of my life with. This is goodbye. He nodded. Thank you for loving me for as long as you did. Then he walked away. I watched him disappear down the same path we had once walked together as a young couple. This time, I didn't cry, because some endings aren't meant to make us bitter. They're meant to make us stronger. Months passed. Emily visited every weekend with Lily. The house was once again filled with laughter. I started painting, traveled with friends, volunteered at the local library. Slowly, I stopped surviving and started living again. People sometimes ask me whether I regret those 34 years. My answer always surprises them. No, because those years gave me a beautiful daughter, a wonderful granddaughter, and countless memories that one person's betrayal could never erase. If there's one lesson my story can leave with you, it's this. Never measure your worth by someone else's decision to walk away. The people who truly love you will never make you feel like you're not enough. And if someone chooses money, status, or appearances over loyalty, don't chase them. Let them go. Because real wealth isn't found in expensive houses, luxury cars, or impressive bank accounts. Real wealth is found in peace, in self-respect, in the people who stay beside you when life becomes difficult. Richard thought he was leaving for a better life. Instead, he lost the very thing money could never replace. And I discovered that sometimes the greatest victory isn't revenge. It's finding happiness after someone else believed they had taken it away.